Hello and welcome to Let's Fix It in Pod, our little show in the VFX universe. One thing our industry is finally starting to embrace are open industry standards. So we think we should really talk about that. Another thing we need to talk about is software, both dead and alive. And we want to talk to two really great software developers.
One is Jonas Kluger from Das Element, and the other one is Mr. Garlic VFX, Arne Palluck. Let's start this episode with sad news. We lost someone from our software family. Modo has been end of life, it's called, and we're going to talk about that and what that means for all of us and why that happened, besides Foundry not making enough money with it. So, Christoph, what's your thought on Modo?
Believe it or not, I actually once owned a Modo license. I was a user from Modo 601 until Modo 901. So just between the area where it was part of Luxology, the company that originally developed it, and then when it went over to the Foundry. And that's the time where I stopped using that. But that actually makes me eligible for Foundry's gratuitous 10-year end of life license. So, Bela, will you explain what this is all about?
Foundry said that Modo is end of life, will not be developed any further. There's one more version coming out, 17.1, with a couple of fixes and stuff, and that's it. The bug support, the security support will run for about a year-ish until all the subscriptions ran out. And after that, you can't get Modo anymore. But for the people working with that tool, and just as a reminder, Modo is 20 years old, so there are a couple of long-time users and apparently quite a few studios who use it on a large scale. For those, there's a 10-year license, meaning you can get the license for free. And if you ever had one license and activate it and use Modo for another 10 years without support, without any bug fixes, without any development or something. That's just to give you the time you need to learn Blender, let's be honest. And if in case you don't know it and haven't played along with it, you can learn Blender way faster than 10 years, but we know some artists take their time with that.
But still, this 10-year limit, don't take that too literal, because there are some caveats and gotchas with that, because what Foundry will not give you, of course, is the source code. And there lies a little problem, at least if you're not working with Modo on Windows, but rather if you're working on Linux or on Mac or on ARM Windows, you might run into the situation that a newer build will of that operating system will not jive with Modo, and you can't recompile that. And also, let's be honest, Foundry will not do that for you after that 1 year period. So, yeah, there is a little bit of an issue.
This is going to be a problem. So obviously you can always go with a virtual machine. That is possible, but painful. There is a performance penalty there. That is not fun.
Consider that the 17.1 update you just mentioned is especially there to fix some of the performance issue that came along with the 17.0.
So jumping from problem to problem to problem. How have you heard that? So that's sad. Modo was a great tool, but never really landed in the Foundryverse. Let's call it that. And anybody want to take any bets? What's gonna happen to the other tools? In your pipeline, when a company decides there's not enough profit for that, or it would be too much effort for an update, that's not gonna be fun.
No, no. I mean, I had to think of how Apple dealt with end of lifing Shake way back when, where there was at least an option to purchase a site license, perpetual license, where you actually got the source code along and could recompile or adjust it to your pipeline. But the way Foundry is handling this right now didn't really jive well with the Modo community. They're pretty angry about the whole issue, and honestly, me as a nuke user, I'm not too happy with this either, just because I really feel like if this is the way a company treats end of lifing your product, it's not really cool. So yeah, if you are affected by this, yeah, maybe voice your concerns with the foundry if you haven't already done so. I think they should know that this is not the best way to deal with this.
Yeah, and so currently Foundry has 7 products, I think.
Hmm.
Well, now 6. They have this Ocular plugin suite for Nuke. There's Hero, there's Mari, Katana, and Flix. I never knew what Flix was. Haven't
Yeah,
opened that
is
one.
Colorway still around?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I don't think so. No.
And and there is a couple of other um, tool sets that got the same treatment from Foundry. There was Athera, which I really liked, and then
Mm.
everybody and
That would have been so handy when Corona came around. Didn't
well,
didn't it?
wasn't that the year where Foundry was bought by another investment conglomerate of hedge fund zombies?
Yeah.
Yeah, that probably hurts some people, but well, they decided they knew better. And then there was Storm, and there was one more that
Yeah, Colorway, right?
colorway, but I'm not sure what happened to that one. I never
Yeah.
used it because I always thought,
No, never quite got the
yeah,
idea actually. Yeah.
but I think that was more for engineering visualization stuff like that.
Yeah.
I always saw car pictures with that. So yeah, and also another problem that's coming up with the end of Modo will be how do you open your files you made there with that, because
Yeah.
hopefully you saved it in something that anything else can open, which brings me to the questions as a non-Modo user. I clicked around with it, but I never used it in actual pipeline. What's the standard format for Modo files?
Well, the native format is .lxo, and I just listened to a 50-minute video rant by Greg from Pixel Fondue, and he really suggested and prayed that Blender will get an LXO importer. So yeah, you mentioned Blender would be the way to go, and I think as Modo is really deeply connected in the indie kind of part of our industry and other industries as well, a lot of design, a lot of product imaging, and all that. Um, it would really help if the good people supporting Blender would create an LXO importer. That would be great.
It would even be better if they had used the open format from the beginning, as any software should do. Basically, I don't. That's something I really do not understand. Why does the with the popular open standards like the OpenEXR, like OpenTimeline.io, there's lots of them. If I were a software company, the software would be that's one thing, and the second thing I'd be doing would every time an open standard comes around, I would put it in my toolbox that I'm trying to sell for with the highest priority, because the thing is that now that we're in a truly global industry, you're gonna have artists dialing in from everywhere in the world. And if you don't want to have a massive cloud infrastructure with virtual machines and stuff like that, they're gonna work on their software, and you're gonna import this. So why not make sure that your software can import anything open that's out there?
Just to play devil's advocate here for a minute, I think there are a couple of reasons why companies are, let's say, reluctant to do so. I think there's a lot more embracing of open standards than there was in the past. So just to put this into perspective, but still, firstly, and we've seen that with a couple of examples in the past. Um, integrating an open standard is not easy. It actually costs a little bit of resource depending on the way your software is built up. It might take actually a lot of resources. So let's take a look what you just said. Modo is 20 years old. Well, so is Nuke, so is Flame,
Is
so
Flame
is
even
the
older?
base of, yeah, actually it's 30 years old, so you
Yeah.
got me there,
So,
right?
did you list?
They had an anniversary edition 25 years, and that is a couple of years back.
So,
So
dear
yeah,
listeners, if you want to feel really old, use Flame.
yeah, works. You can see that with me. No, but what I was getting at was that if you've got this old code, it's actually in some cases a lot of work to rewrite that. There are also architectural concerns. You can see that again with Flame, for example, the way they integrated OpenEXR. Now, if you're used to working inside of Nuke, which natively supports all these massive channels, you would never think to that this could be an architectural problem, but the way Flame originated, it is designed in a way that it uses just RGB and A. And well, upping your architecture in a way that you don't lose the speed of operating the software is really in some cases a hard task. So those are just two examples on why this might be difficult.
That's also something that these sometimes quite big companies. Why don't they have a reasonably well working plugin architecture? I mean, okay, that may be some tiny tool set that one guy made in an afternoon and let's just use it. Um, okay, they don't have the resources, but Autodesk, Adobe, Blackmagic, all these giant companies, why don't they have a reasonably working plugin structure for something like that? Just to it pops up, it gets connected.
To be fair here, there for a couple of years now there's OpenFX, and that is actually a reasonably working plugin structure. The irony being that for a couple of years now, all the plugins out there belong to one company. So basically, if you've got your Boris FX suite installed, you've got all the OpenFX plugins out there. So go figure.
Yeah, and other parts, obviously, integrating something like Material X or something that was developed by a massive company. It's gonna be more difficult than have a new picture standard. Yes, I know, but isn't that what the subscription fee should be paying for? Just a thought.
Yeah.
But
Ask the Moto guys about that.
ouch, ouch. I don't know how much was Modo.
Oh, I don't know. I got it really cheap way back when.
Well,
I paid for something. The young guys among you might not know this, but there was this thing called a perpetual license where you actually kind of own your software. And
so funny enough, I'm on the Foundry side, and the button for buying is still there, but it doesn't go anywhere. You can still download. No, you can't download the trial version anymore.
well, that would be kind of ironic having a trial for that software. But then again, you need a license to run that end of life software. I mean, that's honestly, I don't get that. They issue a 10-year license, but if you haven't got that license, by the way, we'll put a link in the show notes. Um, if you haven't got that license, you can't run an end of life software. Seriously? Is this something like corporate politics? So no, every software we issue needs to have a license. There is no such thing as software without license.
Yeah, that's also something I really don't understand. Well, some of them were developed for companies in a time where licensing was not a problem because every software developer knew all the companies and have their internal IPs and stuff like that. I've talked to a couple of companies who bought older software and brought them into their packages, and they had hard coded licenses and hard coded IPs for stuff. That happened. But yeah, it's not something where one would think that that should be a problem, but well, that's gonna be no fun at all.
Well, I think another reason why companies are reluctant to implement open standards more into their software has not so much to do with the engineers or designers of said software, but more with people like management. And there's always this fear that really embracing such open standards might reveal too much of the secret sauce that they are using in their software, which, of course, is kind of not an argument and not really there.
Let's be honest, when we look at the development of a lot of these tools, they are based either on research tools or on open source tools anyway. So that's a middle management problem, which does not help the thing at all. And but they're very quick to complain that our users aren't using it anymore. They're all going away to Blender and complainy. Yeah, there's a reason people go towards Blender.
The past shows that implementing these standards is not always easy. I'll give you this. So look, for example, at AAF, Advanced Authoring Format, and I remember when I used to work on Quantel's Generation Q software, they really advertised in a huge way that archiving would be based on this open AAF format, which then was quite new. But in essence, yeah, the archive had an AAF extension, but was only readable with a Quantum machine for a couple of $100,000. So this was not like a real implementation. They used AAF, but also a lot of proprietary stuff. So it had basically no real effect. And
But it was used as a marketing. Yes, SSO files are open. You can always
yeah,
access the files, which is
yeah,
something I don't think many artists these days um, have on their radar, because every software can die.
yeah,
Press M for Modo.
yeah. And look, we mentioned now there's suddenly this move to have an LXO importer into Blender, and you will not find any way to open these AAF archives in anything else than a Generation Q product, which has gone the weight of the dodo as well. So yeah, be careful with this. So it might not be in the short term self interest of a software development company to enforce these open standards, but we as a community should be very keen that we use these open standards, because if we use them, then there's much more pressure to implement them more and better. And then we all benefit, especially if a software dies at a certain point in time.
And as a company, implement them as well, because if you have users who aren't starry-eyed students who still believe in everything, a seasoned VFX professional who's even thinking about giving a software a try will look, what can I get in there, what can I get out of it, in terms of files and pipelines. And if you say, oh well, it's all proprietary and we're the best, we're so very perfect, everybody thinks, yeah, well, it's going to be a black box, it's going to go in and never come out. And if you're talking to a big company, this means immediately you're out of the race completely.
Yeah, but honestly, take a look at something like CryptoMats. So those were like really a huge thing for everybody comping CG passes. Finally, we were really able to build our own mats inside of our compositing software. That was a open source tool developed by Psyop in New York, I think, way back when. And for 3 or 4 years, maybe even longer, it's set on their GitHub, available for everybody. It's still there. It's still free as a plugin, but it was so widely adopted that nowadays you'll find a native implementation, of course, in Nuke, but you also find it in Flame, where it wasn't available before at all. You'll also find it inside of Fusion, and I think via third-party plugin, even there are possibilities for After Effects.
And let's be honest, what other tools are there out there that would need a cryptomat? Well, not
Exactly.
Natron, yes, but that's a completely different can of worms.
It teaches us that wide adoption is the key for such a standard to really work. So if you take a look at other things that were tried to implement, I mean, AAF has been around for a long time, and it is used, but it's not like the industry standard. For years, we had EDLs still being the dominant exchange format just because it worked. It didn't do that much, not half of what AAF was supposed to do, but the parser in each software was much better at reading an old school EDL rather than an AAF where it only found certain information or it didn't work with time warps, or, well, we all have been there.
And depending, since EDL was extremely open, um, the exporting wasn't never that easy because I remember that some didn't have markers in, somewhere had blank events, which were, I never understood why those. There were tracks and transitions and stuff like that, and also depending on the pipeline of the broadcast house, it was very flexible to add your personal stuff from your pipeline. But depending on how cleanly you did that, you had a heap of garbage that shot anybody else's timeline. So this is also something that we have to realize, that the current open standards are much more mature in terms of compatibility, basic minimal functions that are always available, whatever tool you use. And as a company, you can build on top of it, not instead of that, which is something that, in terms of long-term investment, is quite good, because you might not have access to the plugins used, to the um transition libraries, whatever, for forever. But you can always
Yeah.
open it, and you can always re-edit it, and that's quite
Yeah.
important, because some of them were just used once, and if something breaks in there, everything's broken. So we've come a long way. And if you look at, for example, USD, which is getting very robust these days, and if you look at stuff like OpenColor.io, which is also working better and better and better with each new version. And
Yes.
also another thing, that with these open standards, it's very unlikely they'll become abandonware.
Well, the last standard that was really widely adopted in the industry was, I would say, ACES. So I think there's also a little bit of reluctance on the artist side to really embrace these standards. And I know ACES from the get go was not that bad. It was really well implemented in a lot of software. It was also quite robust. There were some growing pains on the software sides, but I would say the bigger growing pains were with the actual artists who, I worked in commercials a lot at that time, were used to working on their Rec 709 graded stuff, and they just started to adapt to a linear workflow inside of Flame because they were forced so by the growing presence of Nuke. But no, now I have to deal with Aces. But once you really dug your dug your feet into it, you really got a lot of benefit. And once you were converted, you really don't want to go back. So I was like, really, I have to do this in Rec 709 again? I want to work in Aces. And
Yeah.
by now I find myself converting even Rec 709 stuff to Aces just to be able to work with the same standard each and every time, because then I know my tools work the way I expect them to.
Yeah, and when we look at ACES, which is a color management system, which is something that didn't really happen, except on the highest end of productions. And these days, you get uh, a little pushback, because they say, "Oh, it doesn't look like I want to. It has some deficit in this and this and this area." So basically, the complaining about this is personal opinion on the side of some colorists and some people. But let's be honest. How do you know a colorist? You have a perfect system, and he complains.
But honestly, by now, even in my little army of one setup that I've got here, by now everything is Aces color managed. It's not that hard once you decide to give yourself a little bit of play around time, check it out, but it works really solid. And that is because this is a really well defined standard by now.
And also, what you have to remember, that ACES is not just a standard, a system. It is part of a larger family. There's the color transform language, which integrates well with OpenColor, with the upcoming Fizzlight from Weta, with the raw to ACES converter. These open standards we're talking about are big projects. This is not just something that some dude invented. And they connect to all the other projects that are available for professional use. ACES works wonderfully with OpenEXR, with OpenImageAI. It will probably work well with the new OpenAPV, the professional video format Samsung is developing right now, which just started, and I think by the end of the year we're gonna have the first test stuff. And it also works with with the other imaging and color tools like PTEX and FFmpeg and things like that. The people developing ACES, for example, know about these tools, and they made sure that they can mesh together in a pipeline without annoying the artist too much, which is one other thing I want to emphasize with these open standards, coming from a time where every company had their own standard, and this was proprietary, and that's it. As we say in German, eat or die. And this is breaking up, and the first ones were a bit clunky, yes, but the newer ones like OpenEXR and ACES and stuff like that are well defined, and they're developed by companies who regularly work with other companies. So you have robust pipelines on the highest level. As a single artist, do you have to use their transform language and their? No, you can just use the standard in a everyday way and
Yeah.
can work in it, and you are able to connect to those giant pipelines if you want to, if you need to, or you can have the benefits of those pipelines with thousands and thousands of man hours of some of the smartest minds of our industry available to you to just do your stuff.
I think you made a good point that we as a industry, VFX generally speaking, think of us as the last stop. This is where the product gets finished, but that's not really true, because the content we produce and deliver will then further be worked on, it will be archived, it will be future proofed, and all that things have to be taken into consideration. And that is why it's so important that this is not just defined by a single company as their own
Mm.
workflow. It's important that there are really people thinking about this, and I know this term is frowned upon in our industry, long term.
Some of these projects maybe originated in one company. For example, USD was made by the Pixar guys, but by now quite a few other big ones are working on that, and quite a few small ones are actually using it. And there's one thing I like about these kinds of projects. Once they get above a certain threshold, you get a couple of companies involved, companies, not studios, who really push that forward. For example, USD got that push and that Omniverse money from NVIDIA, who built a whole
Yeah.
product suite around that. And once those companies are involved, you can be sure that's going to stay around for a while. And for example, in the more 3D space, Alembic, its caches was basically made by Lucasfilm, I think, if I remember
Mm.
correctly. And yeah, that's still around, and it was a giant leap up from the FBX and OBJs
True,
of
true.
the last millennium.
Hmm.
And these days, it is becoming Alembic is becoming the um, lowest common denominator, which everything usually can work with these days.
So we established that it's not really in the biggest interest of the software vendors to establish these standards, and I think we both can agree that Cryptomats is kind of a happy accident with that being a quasi standard because everybody just loved it. But this is not the normal way how standards get get established. So in the case of ACES, that was done by the Motion Picture Academy. But we talked a lot about other standards. So how are those defined, and who has got invested interest in establishing these standards?
These days, this is maintained and brought together by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, basically the sister organization who does the Oscars and stuff. Um, and what they did is they founded a software foundation built on the Linux model. So this open software and open documentation standard is deeply ingrained in their DNA. And and if you think that's a couple of people who define willy-nilly, the people defining this stuff are the biggest companies in our field. There's Adobe, AMD, AWS. I'm just reading a list here, so it's alphabetical. There's DNEG, there's Epic, there's DreamWorks, there's Google, Intel. All the others, all the big ones are in there. Nvidia, Samsung, Weta, Disney Animation, everybody, and they decided to give their developers, their technical directors, and their artists some time and some resources to come up with solutions for their problems, which is why most of their things, when they get released, are production ready. They might have some hiccups here and there, but they are production proven. And these days they have a couple of dozen projects on the cooker who will be ready when they're ready. It is not something that has any marketing pressure behind. Oh, we have to release this and this. It's going to be released when it's ready. And that this works, we see by standards they are maintaining, like OpenAsset.io, like OpenXR, Open Timeline.io, ACES. And when they get released into a finished product, there's still going to be development in there. There's still versioning going on. But as a person with not 100 developers on your side, you can trust that it works. And they are basically a meeting point for the big companies wanting to sell stuff, for the big studios wanting to solve their problems they have between themselves. Because remember the last couple of movies you've seen, when the credits roll, there's very, very, very seldom it's just one studio and they have to work together. And this is the area of problems where this was founded. And what they also do is they manage the licensing so that everybody can use the stuff and do the documentation, and also, which in the terms of ACES is acescentral.com, they do the forums and the educational part. So all of these tools have giant forums, GitHubs, whatever, where you can talk to the actual people developing it. So it's not you're going to be in some AI support chat waiting for an answer for a couple of years, but you can get directly into contact with the developers, with the minds behind it, with the people who actually made that happen. So you can get answers quite quickly. And if you can get them a bug they haven't found yet, they're not going to be grumpy. They're going to thank you, because this means the project is developing and maturing. They have a couple of different areas where they're working. There's on one side there's the image and color area, where we've got ACES, OpenEXR, and the upcoming OpenAPV, which has just been confirmed as one of their projects. Then they have the asset area, let's call it that, which has OpenAsset.io, has RES, has Alembic, and things in this type of things, where it's just how do you get stuff from A to B. Then there's the area of rendering and and the render management, let's call it that. There's the OpenQ system, which I've been have been having a play around recently, which is quite interesting. And then there's Material X, which is getting more and more traction. And I hope they never have to change materials and shaders for any time I'm gonna switch a renderer. Hoping for that. And one last thing, they also have the most techie version is the math and simulation area, where there's OpenVDB, which you probably had to play around with and didn't realize, because in a lot of simulation tools, that is the baseline to store that stuff. And also, as we mentioned, in that area is OpenFX. So these are all projects the ASWF maintains.
Two things that I find quite reassuring. Firstly, the list you just read. This just seems like, firstly, impartial because there are a lot of competing
Mhm.
companies in there. Also, it seems like it's maybe not too big to fail, but really hard to fail because there's so much industry weight in
Yeah,
there. That's really, really cool. And yeah, the biggest takeaway is also that actually studios are interested in this.
yeah.
Studios are interested in having a common database. So, and or let me put it differently, a common frame of reference
Mm.
for basically everything. Because you actually read two lists, not only the big companies involved, there also all these open standards. And I mean, we've been using OpenEXR for years. We've been using a lot of this stuff, OpenFX and so forth, for years, using industry standards, maybe without even realizing it. So yeah, I find that quite reassuring that our industry is actually doing something that a lot of industries have done before us, and we were very, very reluctant to do, and that is adopting certified
Yeah.
standards.
Basically, every big player who does development, and not just we release the software, everybody buy it. Off. Every big company is in there, even some that are not technically very deep in our ecosystem and industry. There's stuff like Canonical, who does Ubuntu, and Red Hat is in there, HP is in there, um, the Kronos Group, who does these um, new 3D types, which have nothing to do with VFX, but with online shopping, GLTF. Um,
Yeah.
uh, they are extremely well connected, and usually you can click through to whatever area you need for your pictures. And
Yeah.
also, which I want to mention, they are well connected with the usual organizations who handle this stuff. So if you're a VES member, you are quite close to the ASWF. If you're a SMT member, the same. And yeah, it's a giant network of clever people trying to solve problems we all have.
It's funny that you mentioned the SMPTE because that's something I always kind of wondered slash kind of accepted in the beginning years of my career, is that we kind of piggybacked on the standards of the broadcast industry,
Mhm.
and the further technology developed, the less and less they were really applicable or worked for us. So, like working on graded Rec 709 standards, or like using formats like EDL or things like that. So I'm really happy to see that the industry is getting their together and basically establishing a body of their own. And it's good that they are closely connected to SMPTE, but we're no longer piggybacking.
Yeah, we have our own playground, and not losing contact for with the people who actually broadcast our stuff, because
Yeah,
you can make the nicest commercials in the world. Nobody's going to pay you for it if it doesn't
adhere
get,
to
yeah.
standards.
But I think that's something we should talk about. Which big companies are out there? Which big groups of standard giving people are out there? That's something we're going to do very soon. Also, one thing that we have to look at the ASWF is that they are connected to some companies who will be the next big thing, the inheritors of the VFX world, basically game developers, real-time engine developers. So Epic Games is in there, AWS is in there, um, Sony's in there, Sony Pictures Entertainment. I never understood how Sony actually works, but
It's like the branding of the camera models. It's all mushy.
it's whatever, but it's Sony. And sometimes it works very well. I'm still hoping for the next Spider-Verse movie. So coming back to that, so this will be a way to ensure that the transfer of knowledge will work and that the standards they're developing now and have been developing for a couple of years will work in a couple of years, because when you have Epic in there and Nvidia and the other big game companies, they're going to make sure that this is compatible with their pipelines, which are
Yeah,
sometimes very similar and sometimes completely different.
yeah.
So that's something that is the foundation of the ASWF. And if you want to spend a nice day, look what they're doing. Go through the forums. They have very nice people and very a very very large body of knowledge, of links, of articles, of people you can contact and just talk to them, which is amazing.
So it's one thing to define the standards. The other thing is how well are they implemented. And yeah, Alembic has, I would say, gone its course. It's the lowest common denominator. But
Never thought I
with
used
US,
that term from the maths lessons ever again.
there you are, there you are. But USD is just starting to get
Mhm.
implemented. So talking about growing pains. So if I take a look at Nuke, which is the software I use quite a lot, you've got USD support in there for now almost 2 years, I would say. And granted, it changing the way Nuke handles 3D assets is not a trivial thing. They basically had to redesign their whole 3D environment around USD, and it's been in beta for the last two versions, I think. And I really do hope that they get it out of beta soon. So I hope with Nuke 16 we'll see it being golden, because I want to start using it, assured that it works, because I think it'll also then have the other transition time that artists really get to familiarize and confidently work in this new USD system. So these are not short term projects, neither for the companies uh, implementing the standards into their software, neither for the VFX companies implementing it into their pipelines and then into the artist's everyday life.
But let's be honest, this is one further uh, area of VFX where it's adapt.ai. Because as a company, if you don't have these standards in your toolbox, people are gonna go away from your package. There's no single package that is irreplaceable, as much as your marketing team will tell you. And the tools that have these additional functions and features and connections to other stuff, because let's remember this is not just one color management system, that's not just one file format. There is whole databases for the whole math and simulation side with OpenVDB. There's the whole rendering area with OpenQ and Material X and stuff like that. And then we get into the asset side, which is the stuff you actually work with OpenAsset.io and RES and so many other things. These are the stuff. These are the parameters people will use to judge your product. So get
Mm,
your together. And
yes.
but as someone who's definitely not a programmer and barely can scramble something together in Python, I think we should ask somebody who knows a bit about this stuff how difficult it is and which things are easy to implement and which are difficult to implement. So for that, we went far and wide, and I stayed in Munich and asked the technical director of the Hochschule für Fernsehen und Film München, the HFF, which is Jonas Kluger. He does the technical directing for all their student movies and the studio management on the software side for the HFF. And because apparently that's not enough to keep him occupied, he also developed a software called Das Element, which is a asset management tool, but it's smart. It's not just files and folders. It does renaming, it does previews, it does search, so many things, and we're gonna ask him about that.
Jonas, thank you so much for joining us. Before we dig into all the intricacies that come along when integrating open standards, could you give us a brief overview what you are actually doing with Das Element?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. Great to be here on the show. Das Element. I am the founder of Das Element, which is an asset library software. And the general idea of the software is to have a tool that's tailored to the industry needs for visual effects. And its sole purpose is to help you as an artist to store assets and retrieve them and use them in your creative work. It can be used for different use cases as well, but the main focus is organizing the files that you maybe have in your internal pipeline or that you purchased off the internet from some third-party vendor. And it helps you to store these files in a nice organized naming convention and folder structure on disk, but also abstracts away certain metadata information like tags, keywords, and so on in a database. So you can quickly browse everything that you want to find and focus on the creative work.
So I imagine if you're working on such a tool, which basically has to collect any kind of format that is out there, what are the challenges of integrating open standards, starting with simple images sequences like an OpenEXR to the more advanced things like an Alembic file or USD, you name it?
Yeah, so talking about open standards, in my opinion, the operating system that a user uses or wants to use should be like an open standard, which means software should not restrict you as an artist in the hardware that you choose to actually get the job done. So if you want to use a certain operating system, you should be able to. And I think it's the same for media files. I mean, these open standards for 2D, 3D, there's always a story behind it, like why they actually exist. So people figured out, okay, that's the best way to deal with these 3D files. So everybody should use them, and you shouldn't be limited on which versions of these models you're using. So every software vendor should also implement these open standards into their source code. The problem, on the other hand, for being a software developer is that now everybody can use every operating system and every format. And when an open standard is developed, a lot of smart people come together and pitch in ideas to come up with that open standard in the first place. So if you start implementing, you take the source code from that standard or implement it into your software. And while doing that, and while figuring out all the technical issues that are along the way, other people already developed this open standard further. So there are new iterations, new versions of that standard. So not only do we have to now keep up with the latest changes, but also the stuff where we started out, like first figuring out how to implement it into our software and different operating systems and so on. So it's always a challenge of keeping up and staying up to date with all the latest developments.
So do you have a special approach when dealing with these requests? So for example, I know the Foundry is very strictly adhering to the VFX reference platform when it comes to the formats they are supporting inside of Nuke. On the other hand, a company like Autodesk, when you take a look at Flame, usually as soon as something is out there, they try to implement it as fast as possible. Now, resources being finite, I reckon you have to take your own unique approach to your user base.
You mentioned the VFX reference platform, which is a great source that everybody should stick with working in visual effects and animation, because they every year put out a detailed list of these are the versions for the different packages that you were supposed to use, if possible. Because again, like there are a lot of versions out there for each package. So it's good to have a reference, or like a version that everybody agrees on for a certain year. The challenges now is that studios are often behind that recommendation. For example, the beloved operating system CentOS 7 is end of life. We're now in the year 2024, and mid of 2024 it has been put end of life, which means it's no longer developed. So we should stop using it, right? The problem, a lot of studios out there are still running CentOS 7 in their production environments, and it takes them a long time to upgrade their operating system while maintaining a stable and solid foundation for the infrastructure and the pipelines they are running. So it takes them just a lot of work to upgrade everything to a new version. And that just takes time and a lot of hours to put in to figure out all the technical issues. That's why it's like an in-between mix, like listening to the user base, because they are actually the artists and the people using the tools, while trying to push them forward to be a little bit more future-proof in terms of tools that they want to use.
When we compare that with proprietary codecs, how difficult is it to get, for example, something by a company like Adobe Autodesk, some of their formats? Is that easier to implement? Is there support by them for doing that?
Yeah, open standards are great because they're open and you know how they work, and there are documentations how to use them. If you talk about proprietary tools and codecs, someone put a lot of money into building these, for example, codecs or the magic behind Photoshop files and so on. So the companies, they want to get something out of it in the end. For example, MP3. It was developed by the Fraunhofer Society, and it's an institute that put in a lot of work in developing that codec for MP3 files. However, they were contracted to do so. So if a company puts out a format, they have some intent of maintaining control, and in the end, it all comes down to making out some money and revenue out of a format. That's why some proprietary formats are not open to everybody to use and contribute to, because the companies have some interest in keeping control, which we often see also in camera raw codecs. Again, a lot of work went into building these, and the companies maybe don't want to open source them in a way, because if everybody could contribute their ideas and pitch in like on how to improve these codecs, it would be too much of a work to maintain them and like just manage what goes into these codecs and what not. And that's what actually the company's doing internally. Yes.
Also, I would figure that a company like Ari is somewhat afraid of reverse engineering some algorithms if the standard becomes too open.
I'm sure it is. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of intellectual property goes into these formats. On the other hand, we have, for example, Blender, which is like an open source tool, and open source using open standards. However, open doesn't mean it's free. Someone has to pay. Now, in the new Blender versions, a lot of external companies contribute, and they actually hire people. They have like a staff of like 2-3 developers, solely focusing on developing for Blender. But in return, they want to get some benefit out of it, I'm sure. So it's always bridging the gap between putting your work out there, but then get something in return.
So, Jonas, you mentioned how much legacy formats and iteration of formats and versions you have to carry along in developing a software. But let's look ahead instead. What are the formats that you see really relevant in the near to midterm future?
So I guess one thing that everybody's talking about is using OpenUSD in their tools, pipelines, and so on. It takes time. It takes a lot of time to implement these and to really get them knitted into the different pipelines. For example, some studios, they say that they are using USD when it's actually just like a intermediate packaging format sometimes. So I talked to some studios and they have their internal pipeline where they work with Alembics, FBX, OBJs, and so on. And if they send work to an external vendor or third company, they package everything into a USD file, which again, the other company, they unpackage everything and then use the FBX files for their internal pipeline. So it takes a little more time to really get them implemented and to be like future-proof, but it's heading definitely in the right direction. And one of the issues that I've seen is that it's an open standard, but yet every studio and software is having a little bit of different interpretation how to use these open standards. So now we have different versions of USD in a way.
So we're in a phase of growing pains, basically, that we've probably experienced with each and every format that came around, starting with OpenEXR. I imagine that with a 3D format like USD, it is infinitively more complex than a simple image sequence.
Yeah, like 3D is by nature just way harder to deal with than 2D images. One thing I want to point out for the future is the way we interact with software. Because like historically speaking, most of software is quite static in a way. So we know Qt application and Qt front ends. But I'm personally a huge fan of the whole web technology that's out there. So for example, why not interact with the software with a user interface that's built, for example, with JavaScript, React, some more dynamic user interface. So one of the things we're looking into is streaming the content of USD and the USD viewer into a web front end. Because it allows us to run the tool anywhere, basically. Even let producers, coordinators, and all the other members in the team interact with larger USD files. And sometimes you just want to see, hey, is it the right version? Is the back of that asset really modeled, and so on? So streaming and having formats for web like GLTF and GLC, for example, which is like a packaged version of GLZ, which includes all the textures, all the models, animations, and so on. Maybe that's some technology to look into.
Well, this sounds certainly exciting, but let's also talk about the other things that you are doing, because you're not only occupied with Das Element, because integrating loads of different formats into an asset management software probably isn't just enough to keep you occupied. So you're also taking care of the visual effects department at the Hochschule für Film und Fernsehen in Munich. So you work a lot with students. So with the constant change of workflows and the way we treat media, how do you introduce somebody who's probably just started shooting their first little trial films on maybe an iPhone or something like that? How do you introduce somebody like that to the professional world of a VFX pipeline?
The new generation is great because they bring a lot of positive spirit and they're eager to learn. And I've seen a little bit of a change because now the students coming into the colleges, all they have is like their iPad and like a tablet. So they draw on their iPad. I walked into someone recently, they had like the VR glasses on and just doing sculpting in 3D space. So there's a little bit of a shift, like they are not used to working on the workstation actually when they start out, because you can do everything on a tablet. Which maybe results from starting out and not having that much money to invest into hardware. So the first question they always ask, can we install XYZ software packages which are free, like open source or free to them, because they're not used to these higher standard A-level 3D applications. So it's teaching them the basics and then telling them about other software applications and formats, for example, talking about color spaces. You should start out simple to teach them the concept. And then after a while, you can teach them about ACEs. But they first have to understand the basics, like I guess every person has to starting out in the industry.
So you're doing das Element. You're doing your work in teaching the next generation. But that obviously still isn't enough for you. So you've got something which is called the VFX shop. So what are you offering there? What can people find there? And before you even ask, yes, we'll put the link in the show notes.
Well, working 5 days a week is fun, but then there are still the weekends. So the VFX shop is a side project where we try to come up with sustainable tools for the visual effects industry. For example, not packaging everything into plastic. For example, tracking markers. And other useful, nifty tools for visual effects on-set work, as well as some fun t-shirts and stuff to wear for the visual effects artists because, well, we love our industry, we love doing the work that we do. We should show it off, and yeah. And actually, one of the side projects I recently started is something called the VFX Screen, which is a free app to be used by everybody that's going on set and doing screen replacement and screen inserts, because it allows you to, in the sense of open standards, not be limited by the tools and operating system and devices that you're using, but you actually can download the app. You can use it an online version, offline version, an Android, iOS. It's running on Windows, Linux, Mac OS, and yeah, it's a simple app. You can make any screen insert in there, like a green screen, a blue screen. You can have different tracking markers. Just everything that you need if you're shooting some phone commercials or just people showing you something on the phone. Maybe in the future also screen inserts in some car commercials and so on. So an open format, open standard for everybody to use. And it's a fun project.
So thank you so much for taking the time, Jonas. Was a really great talk, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Bela, I think you'll agree that integrating open standards into a software is a little bit harder than we initially thought. So very much thank you, Jonas, for your perspective. But we've got a second guest lined up, and that is Arne Palluck of Garlic VFX. He's not only a great artist, he also developed 2 great tools that should make every Compass life a lot easier.
One is a film back calculator to give you the film back size for certain cameras, and the other one is a calculator on how long your rendering is going to take and how much storage you should have available. And also, because he's a VFX artist, you can put in the deadline by the second. So, hi Arne, thanks for joining us.
Hi.
Why did you make these tools on your new website?
I just wanted to play around with ideas which could make your life easier as a VFX artist, but which aren't too hard to get done in a couple of days. So I wouldn't dedicate my life to it. And so the first thing was the VFX calculator, with which we can define how long our renders will estimately take until they're ready, how much space it will take up, and how much time it will take us to transfer the data then to the client who wants to proceed with it. Actually, it's not a huge function behind like calculating the time your renders would take, but it's pretty cool when I just say like, this is the time one frame takes, this many frames, and then I get a list of all sorts of stuff where I have an idea how long is realistically to plan ahead, so I can tell a client, okay, at this point you will have it. With the calculator, I have a more realistic reminder, because that's now rocket science, knowing that. But it's just a reminder, hey, be aware, this won't work like you're thinking it does. So this was the idea behind the
The other tool is the filmback calculator, which is basically a database, if I understand it.
Yeah, exactly. So almost like a bit of calculation happens at the end if you want it to do that. But it's basically a database, and also have to take I didn't scrape through the internet myself in a week to get all this data, I have to tell here. Of course, I went to the usual suspects. Ari especially is very open with with the data, so you get the film backs pretty fast there. They have like sheets. But a lot of work was done by the guys or the people who made this. I think everybody who is working in VFX knows like the VFX camera database. And of course, I went there and I took the just the aspect ratios and the film backs from there. The reason why I thought it would be good to make a tool out of it was because I myself was sometimes overwhelmed just finding my way through this database.
Also, which I think is quite difficult. I know that from one of the action cameras, we're not going to say the name. They sometimes had different sensors with the same model, which is something I think the camera database struggles with. And also a couple of these companies, especially looking at our beloved Sony, their naming schemes are horrible. I've seen people from Sony getting confused by that. Was it the A7, the A7R, the A7R2S, the A7R2S Mark III? So, yeah, and the filmback calculator just says the camera brand. So you have Arri, Blackmagic, Canon, Panavision, Panasonic, Red, and Sony so far. I think others might be ahead. And if you click on one brand, then you have the different cameras. So let's say we're going with Arri. We have the 35, the Mini LF, and so on, which in this case is about 20-ish. And you say this is the camera model. And then you select the format which you're shooting on. And then you get the filmback details with the resolution, the pixel dimensions, and the actual sensor size, both in millimeters and in inches, because inches still exist, which I don't understand. And then also you can have a second calculator, second factor for anamorphic lenses. So if your DOP is one of those people and shoots in 1.33, you can enter the custom factor and you get the anamorphic sensor size. So, Arne, what's coming up next? Do you have any other tools?
Actually, what I was doing for the last couple of days, like on the side, was I am trying to create a time tracker, basically, which is perfectly for my what I want from a time tracker, because there are like time trackers out there and they have like dozens of features and like a lot of stuff I really don't need or don't want to have. I just want to have like a very, very, very basic time tracker actually, with some little cool features in it I can apply, and then the idea is that it would be saved in the, like people could also save it and come back to it when they go to this page. Like it would be saved locally on their storage, of course.
So tell us about your website, because it's called Garlic VFX or Garlic VFX.
Why garlic? Because garlic is a when you are cooking something great, garlic often spices it up in a way which leaves a lasting impression of the meal, and you think like, yeah, the garlic really did it. And so I thought when the commercial guy or the TV or the movie guy comes to me, he has in mind like, yeah, when I'm going to Garlic VFX, he will spice it up so people will taste and feel the difference. So that's garlic.
Thanks for joining us. You'll find all the links in the description of the video and the podcast. And thanks for dropping by, Arne.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I really like those tools from Garlic VFX. But let's head over to the news section. And the first thing we want to talk about are a couple of upcoming events. And the first one is really close on the heels of the release of this episode. And this is World VFX Day. So this is the second World VFX Day. The last one, 2023, was a huge success. So huge, in fact, that they decided to make World VFX Days. So we'll have online events streaming from Tokyo in Japan on both the 6th and the 8th of December. And follow the link in the show notes for the program.
And if you like the World VFX Day, a lot of those people will be at FMX, which published its date, and the program chair. So mark your calendars for May 6th to 9th in Stuttgart, Germany. And the on-demand program, which last year was absolutely amazing, will be running from May 10th to June 9th. And and they published the name of the chair of the program, and that's going to be Paul Debebeck this year. If you don't know Paul, he worked on a couple of small independent movies like Matrix or Avatar or Gravity, and he's one of those guys who develop stuff now that we're all going to use in 10 years. So these are the event news, and in other tech news, there's not that much happening because the year is winding down. Everybody's having a break, and some of the developers are going back to their burrows to solve their parents' printer problems. So we got a couple of point releases, for example.
For example, we've got 19.1 of Resolve, and of course also of Resolve Studio and Fusion Studio. And I think there are a lot of ease of life fixes and enhancements there, namely, and I will really enjoy this once I edit this episode, improvements to the multicam workflow. There are also improvements to audio. Fairlight page has been updated. And I think there have been a couple of updates to the Fusion presets, especially enhancing and easing in your way if you're interested into motion graphics. So this is definitely something you should check out. And also, Bela, I heard there is a special feature you want to point out.
They did something that I really was hoping for a really long time, because my workflow is usually a bit chaotic. And by now...
You don't say.
So now Resolve can do watch folders, meaning if you import a folder as a bin, it will add all the media that gets in there into your media pool, which is a giant time saver for me, because I usually forget to... And also it does relinking, but that I already tried. If you delete something from the watch folder, it doesn't, it just puts the media offline. So that's a great way to do that, and will surely help with editing.
I think having this watch folder functionality is really great if you work in a larger pipeline and have a lot of renders coming in. So especially on a tight deadline, having this kind of watch folder so that various artists can put their renders there and they'll automatically pop up in the finishing artist's Resolve timeline. I think that's a great way to use this functionality.
Another addition I'm looking forward to seeing in action, which I haven't tried yet, is that Fusion now talks USD. One would think that a point update is just a couple of bug fixes, but they really put a lot of helpers in all of the pages, from the media page for the import to all the way through the export page, which one additional thing which I tried many years ago and failed miserably. Now you can just drag and drop the render queue if you put out your clips. So you can do the smallest ones first and see if you made a mistake. Quite helpful. But Resolve might have a problem, because Apple decided after 10 years that their professional editing tool deserves an upgrade. So Final Cut 11 has been released, and boy, that's bad. So now I have magic masks, which all the others have.
Resolve has had that for like 2 or 3 years now.
Yeah, and in a working way. Another thing that Apple finally thought that might be helpful for their users is automatic transcription, which all the others had for at least a year, some even longer, because it worked in the 18.5 beta of Resolve a while ago. So, yay, wonderful. And they also can do log HEVC files for somebody who uses that, which I've been told that a lot of these run and gun documentary filmmakers like to use that stuff. And it's been announced that Final Cut will be able to use BRAW, so Blackmagic RAW files. Yeah, so that's it. All in all, it looks like a bit of a Instagrammer update, to be honest. But that's been Final Cut for the last years.
This one is clearly aimed at the content creator market and not so much at the high-end visual effects commercial market. But as you mentioned, they kind of, let me put this politely, they got inspired by Resolve quite a bit. And to put a cherry on that cake, they actually released a Final Cut camera app for the iPhone, which basically is the same thing as the Blackmagic camera app that has been out there now for a year.
But also, there's one good news, which I think we can all agree on, because about 2 hours before we recorded this episode, Blender 4.3 has been released, and it looks amazing. Just a few things for you to consider, so you have something to do after this podcast. You can listen to all the old episodes if you want to, or you can have a play around with Blender 4.3, which now has a probably quite robust light linking. It has a specialized metallic BSDF node. It has the F82 tint. Amazing tools if you're working with metals and stuff. And there's a couple of industries and hobbyists working with these things called cars, I've been told. There's enhancements to the animation toolkits, which has been has a new auto keyframe mode, which should be quite good if you're doing some repetitive animations there. For example, for 100 characters, and you can do this. There's also an update to the compositor system, which we'll look at quite soon. And the pricing model for Blender is obviously it's free. Download it, play around.
So this concludes our show, and we'll take a little break to travel home to our parents and fix the IT problems. And we want to wish you, if you celebrate, a Merry, Merry Christmas and, of course, a happy 2025. And we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.